What would you do if your family being told to leave your own home right in front of your family and friends? But instead of walking out, I did something so shocking, it changed everything. Want to know what happened? Don't blink, because you won't want to miss a single second of this story. There's something about the quiet of the house before dawn that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. That's how it felt that morning when I rolled out of bed at 4 o'clock, careful not to wake George, who was snoring softly beside me. I slipped on my old, faded robe, the one with the coffee stain that just won't come out, no matter how many times I wash it, and padded down the hallway, my slippers whispering against the floorboards. The house was still, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak as the house settled. I took a deep breath, savoring the peace, knowing that in a few hours, this same kitchen would be filled with laughter, chatter, and the inevitable chaos that comes with family gatherings. I flicked on the kitchen light, squinting a little as my eyes adjusted. There, on the counter, was my to-do list, written in my neatest handwriting the night before. I always make a list. Old habits die hard, and if I don't write it down, I'll forget something. Today was special. It was Amanda's birthday, and even though she can be a little, well, let's just say particular, I wanted everything to be perfect. After all, isn't that what we do? We try over and over to make things just right for our families, even if it means running ourselves ragged. I started with the cinnamon rolls, because nothing says special occasion like the smell of cinnamon and sugar wafting through the house. I mixed the dough, kneading it until my arms ached, then set it aside to rise. While the dough did its magic, I moved on to the roast beef. I seasoned it just the way my mother taught me. Salt, pepper, a little garlic, and a secret blend of herbs I keep tucked away in a jar labeled Mom's Magic. I could almost hear her voice in my ear, telling me to be generous with the seasoning, to trust my instincts. Funny how those little lessons stick with you, isn't it? Next came the potato salad. Now this isn't just any potato salad. This is the potato salad, the one my mother swore me to secrecy over. She used to say, "Don't you dare give this recipe to anyone, not even your best friend." I always laughed, but I've kept my promise. I boiled the potatoes, chopped the celery and onions, and mixed everything together with just the right amount of mayonnaise and mustard. I tasted it, perfect as always. I smiled, thinking of all the times I'd made this dish for birthdays, holidays, and Sunday dinners. It's funny how food can hold so many memories, isn't it? As the sun began to peek through the kitchen window, I set the table. Not just any table setting, mind you. I pulled out the good china, the delicate plates with the tiny blue flowers that only see the light of day for special occasions. I laid out the silverware, polished to a shine, and folded the napkins just so. I even put out the crystal glasses, the ones that make that lovely ringing sound when you tap them. I stood back and surveyed my work, feeling a little thrill of satisfaction. It looked beautiful, if I do say so myself. But as I wiped my hands on my apron, I couldn't help but wonder, will Amanda even notice? I mean, really notice. Will she see the effort, the love, the hours I poured into making this day special for her? Or will it all just blend into the background? Another family gathering, another meal she didn't have to cook? I know I'm not the only one who's felt that way. How many times have we, as mothers and grandmothers, gone above and beyond, only to have our efforts go unnoticed? It's a question that tugs at my heart more often than I'd like to admit. I glanced at the clock. Still early. I took a moment to sit at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and listening to the birds begin their morning song. I thought about Amanda, about how things had changed since she joined the family. She's younger, with her own ideas about how things should be done. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to balance tradition with her new ways. I want her to feel welcome, to feel loved, but sometimes I wonder if I'm trying too hard. Maybe I should just let things be, let her take the lead. But then, who would make the cinnamon rolls? Who would remember to set the table with the good china? As I sat there, lost in thought, I realized that, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if she notices every little detail. What matters is that I did it. I showed up, I put in the effort, and I made the day special in my own way. Maybe she'll notice, maybe she won't. But I'll know, and sometimes that has to be enough. With a deep breath, I stood up, ready to face the rest of the day. The house would soon be filled with family, with laughter and noise, and Yes, maybe a little drama. But for now, in the quiet of the early morning, I felt a sense of peace. I was ready. After all, isn't that what we do? We keep showing up, no matter what. And as I glanced at the table one last time, I couldn't help but smile. "Let's see what today brings," I whispered, and got back to work. By the time the clock struck noon, the house was alive with the kind of energy only a family gathering can bring. The front door opened and closed in a steady rhythm, each arrival bringing a new burst of laughter, a fresh wave of hugs, and the familiar sound of shoes being kicked off in the entryway. Brian, always the first to arrive, gave me a quick squeeze and a proud smile, his eyes darting to the spread I'd laid out on the dining table. "Mom, you outdid yourself," he whispered, and my heart swelled just a little. Lily and Ethan, faces flushed with excitement, made a beeline for the kitchen, their eyes wide as they spotted the cake perched on the counter. "Grandma, is that chocolate?" they asked in unison, and I winked, telling them they'd have to wait until after dinner. The air was thick with the scent of roast beef and cinnamon, and for a moment I let myself believe that everything was just as it should be. And then she arrived. Amanda swept in with the kind of presence that turned heads, her heels clicking on the hardwood, her hair perfectly styled, her dress crisp and new. She carried herself like a queen, chin high, eyes scanning the room as if she were inspecting her subjects. She barely glanced my way, offering a quick, tight-lipped smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I tried not to take it personally. She's always been reserved, a little distant, and I've learned over the years not to expect too much warmth. Still, I couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. I'd spent hours making sure everything was perfect for her birthday, hoping maybe this year she'd see how much I cared. The house filled quickly, voices overlapping in a cheerful cacophony. George, always the peacemaker, poured drinks and made small talk, while Brian helped the kids with their coats. I floated from room to room, refilling platters, straightening napkins, and making sure everyone had what they needed. I caught snippets of conversation. My niece talking about her new job, my brother-in-law complaining about traffic, Lily and Ethan giggling over a secret joke. It was noisy, a little chaotic, but it was home. I felt a sense of pride as I watched everyone enjoying themselves, the house filled with the kind of warmth that only comes from family. When it was finally time to eat, I called everyone to the table. The good china gleamed under the soft light, the roast beef sat proudly in the center, and the potato salad, my mother's secret recipe, waited in a crystal bowl. I took my usual seat at the end of the table, the spot I'd claimed years ago, the one that felt most like mine. I smoothed my skirt, took a deep breath, and looked around at the faces I loved. That's when it happened. Amanda, who had been chatting quietly with her friends, suddenly turned to me. Her eyes, usually so guarded, were icy and sharp, cold as a January morning. She leaned forward, her voice low but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Get out of here! I didn't invite you!" she growled, her words slicing through the room like a knife. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard her. Surely she couldn't mean me. Not after everything I'd done. Not in my own home, at my own table. But the look on her face told me she was deadly serious. The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. Even the dog, who had been gnawing contentedly on a bone under the table, stopped and looked up, his ears perked in confusion. I felt the blood drain from my face, my hands suddenly cold and clammy. I looked around the table, searching for some sign that this was all a terrible joke, that someone would laugh and break the tension. But no one moved. Brian stared at his plate, his jaw clenched tight. George's eyes darted between me and Amanda, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Lily and Ethan looked at me with wide, uncertain eyes, sensing that something was very wrong. "Have you ever felt like a ghost at your own party? Like you've suddenly become invisible, erased from the very place you worked so hard to create?" That's how I felt in that moment, like I was fading away, my presence shrinking to nothing. I wanted to speak, to defend myself, to remind everyone that this was my house, my table, my food. But the words caught in my throat, tangled up with years of trying to keep the peace, of biting my tongue for the sake of family harmony. I glanced. At the table I'd set so carefully that morning, the good china now feeling like a cruel joke. I thought of the hours I'd spent in the kitchen, the love I'd poured into every dish, the hope that maybe, just maybe, this year would be different. But now, all I felt was a deep, aching sense of betrayal. The silence stretched on, heavy and awkward. I could feel the eyes of every guest on me, waiting to see what I would do. Part of me wanted to run, to lock myself in my bedroom and let the tears fall. Another part wanted to stand up and shout, to demand the respect I deserved. But instead, I just sat there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. In that moment, I realized something painful but true. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, it's never enough for some people. And sometimes, the hardest thing in the world is to stand your ground when you feel like you don't belong. But as I sat there, surrounded by the people I loved, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't let this moment define me. I wouldn't let her words erase all the good I'd done. I was still here, still standing, still the heart of this family, even if, for a moment, I felt like a ghost. And as I looked around the table, I wondered, what would you have done in my place? I stood up, my knees creaking louder than the floorboards, and for a moment I felt every year of my life settle into my bones. Every eye in the room was on me. George's gaze was worried and helpless, Brian's face a mask of confusion and embarrassment, and little Lily and Ethan sat frozen, their small hands gripping their napkins, not sure whether to laugh or cry. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it fear or just the caffeine from all those early morning coffees? I could feel the tension in the room, thick as fog, pressing in on me from all sides. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and began to walk toward the door, slow and steady, like I was in some dramatic movie. Each step felt heavy, as if I was wading through water, but I kept my head high, refusing to let Amanda's words break me. I wondered, as I crossed the room, if anyone would stop me, if someone would call out or reach for my hand, but no one did. I reached the doorway, put my hand on the knob, and paused. For a split second, I considered just leaving, walking out and letting them all figure out dinner for themselves, letting Amanda have her way and her party, and letting the silence speak for me. But then something inside me snapped. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was years of being the glue that held this family together. Or maybe it was just the absurdity of the moment. But I realized I wasn't ready to give up my place in my own home, not without a fight. And certainly not without a little flair. Instead of leaving, I turned around, marched right back to the table, and locked eyes with Amanda. I could see the surprise flicker across her face, her confidence faltering for the first time that day. Without a word, I reached over, grabbed the birthday cake, the one I'd spent hours baking and decorating, the one with the delicate pink roses and Amanda's name piped in careful script, and held it up for everyone to see. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I could feel the weight of every gaze, the anticipation, the confusion, the curiosity. With a big, mischievous grin, I plopped the cake down in front of Amanda and said, "Well, since I'm not invited, I guess I'll just take my cake and eat it too." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Lily and Ethan burst into giggles, clapping their hands and chanting, "Grandma! Grandma!" as if I'd just performed a magic trick. Brian looked like he wanted to crawl under the table, his face turning a shade of red I hadn't seen since he was a boy, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And George just shook his head, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Pride and amusement dancing in his eyes. Amanda? She was speechless for the first time ever. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The rest of the guests didn't know whether to laugh or gasp. Some did both, their faces a mix of shock and delight. The tension that had filled the room just moments before began to melt away, replaced by a ripple of laughter and a few nervous chuckles. I sat back down, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhilaration. I'd stood up for myself, and I'd done it with a little humor, a little mischief, and a whole lot of heart. The party, which had teetered on the edge of disaster, suddenly felt lighter. People started talking again, the kids resumed their giggling. And even Amanda managed a weak smile, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes softer than before. As I looked around the table, I realized that sometimes you have to make a little noise to be heard. Sometimes you have to remind people that you're not just the background character in their story, you're the author of your own. And if that means grabbing the cake and making a scene, so be it. I caught George's eye and he gave me a wink, a silent message of support that made my heart swell. Brian finally relaxed, letting out a breath he'd been holding, and Lily and Ethan started chanting for cake again, their voices bright and joyful, the earlier tension forgotten. The moment had passed, but the lesson lingered, settling over the table like a warm blanket. I realized that I didn't have to fade into the background, that I didn't have to accept being pushed aside, not in my own home, not by anyone. I could stand up for myself, claim my place, and do it with a smile. As the laughter grew and the conversation picked up, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I'd faced down my fear, my doubt, and my disappointment, and I'd come out the other side stronger, lighter, and maybe even a little bit wiser. I glanced at Amanda, who was now cutting the cake, her hands a little shaky, but her smile genuine, and I knew that things would be different from now on. Maybe not perfect, maybe not easy, but different. And as I watched my family dig into the cake I'd made with love, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sometimes you have to remind the world and yourself that you matter, that your voice counts, and that you're not going anywhere. And if you can do it with a little humor and a lot of heart, well, that's the icing on the cake. For a moment after my little cake stunt, the room was suspended in a kind of stunned silence, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. I could feel the eyes of every person in that dining room fixed on me and Amanda, the air thick with anticipation and a hint of disbelief. My heart was still pounding, but now it was mixed with a strange sense of exhilaration. I'd done something bold, something I never would have imagined myself doing just a few years ago. And as I looked around at the faces of my family, some shocked, some amused, some just plain delighted, I realized that sometimes a little shake-up is exactly what a family needs. Lily and Ethan were the first to break the spell. They burst into giggles, clapping their hands and chanting, "Grandma! Grandma!" as if I'd just pulled a rabbit out of a hat. Brian, bless his heart, looked like he wanted to disappear under the table, his cheeks turning a shade of red I hadn't seen since he was a teenager caught sneaking cookies before dinner. George, always my silent supporter, gave me a little wink from across the room, his eyes twinkling with pride and maybe a touch of relief. And then there was Amanda, sitting at the head of the table, her mouth slightly open, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and, I suspected, a bit of admiration. For a few seconds, Amanda just stared at the cake in front of her, as if it might explode. Then, slowly, she looked up at me. Our eyes met, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something soften in her expression. She let out a breath, shook her head, and, much to my surprise, cracked a smile. It wasn't a big, toothy grin, but it was real. "Okay," she said, her voice a little shaky but laced with humor. "Maybe I overreacted." The tension in the room broke like a dam. Laughter erupted from every corner, the kind of laughter that bubbles up when everyone realizes they've been holding their breath for too long. I let out a laugh myself, feeling the weight of the day lift off my shoulders. "Well, honey," I said, "if you're going to kick me out of my own house, you'd better be prepared to lose the cake." 2. That got another round of laughter, even from Brian, who finally looked up from his plate and shook his head in disbelief. Lily and Ethan, emboldened by the change in mood, started chanting for cake, and I couldn't help but join in. "Cake! Cake! Cake!" We all cheered, and just like that, the party was back on track. As we cut the cake and passed around slices, I noticed that the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier tension was gone, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and, dare I say, a little bit of mischief. Amanda, still a bit red-faced, actually laughed at one of George's corny jokes. Brian relaxed, joining in the conversation, instead of nervously glancing between us. Even the dog seemed to sense that the storm had passed, curling up under the table with a contented sigh. It struck me then how quickly things can change. How a single moment of courage or foolishness, depending on how you look at it, can turn the tide. I'd spent so many years trying to keep the peace, to smooth over every rough edge, to make sure everyone was happy, often at the expense of my own feelings. But in that moment, standing up for myself, I realized that sometimes you have to make a little noise to be heard. And if you can do it with a bit of humor, all the better. After everyone had eaten their fill and the plates were cleared, Amanda came over to me in the kitchen. She hesitated for a moment, then reached out and touched my arm. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I guess I just got overwhelmed. I didn't mean to take it out on you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the intimidating woman who'd swept into my house earlier, but a young woman trying to find her place in a family that sometimes felt like a whirlwind. I smiled and squeezed her hand. "We all have our moments," I said. "But just remember this house is big enough for both of us. And next time, you're in charge of the cake." She laughed, and for the first time, I felt a genuine connection between us. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe we'd still have our ups and downs, but we'd found a new understanding. And that, I realized, was worth every awkward moment, every hurt feeling, every early morning spent in the kitchen. As the sun set and the last guests trickled out, I sat down at the now empty table, the good china waiting to be washed, the crumbs of cake scattered like confetti. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to write the perfect story for my family, always putting myself in the background, always making sure everyone else had a starring role. But today, I'd taken center stage, if only for a moment, and it felt good. So ladies, if you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't let anyone push you out of your own story. You wrote the first chapter, and you get to write the last. Stand up for yourself, even if your knees creak and your heart pounds. And if you can do it with a little humor, you might just find that the people around you are ready to laugh with you. Not at you, here's to all of us, the mothers, the grandmothers, the women who keep the world turning, one cinnamon roll at a time. May we always remember that our stories matter, and that sometimes the best way to be heard is to grab the cake and make a little scene. And as I finally put my feet up and savored the last bite of cake, I couldn't help but smile. After all, isn't life just a series of unexpected moments, best enjoyed with a little laughter and a lot of love? If you enjoyed this story, and you've ever had a family moment that made you want to laugh, cry, or just grab the cake and run, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep sharing our stories, our laughter, and maybe a few secret recipes along the way. What would you have done in my shoes? Tell me in the comments. I can't wait to hear your stories.